Hi, my name is Nick Kennedy. The author I chose to research about is Mark Twain. Mark Twain's actual name is Samuel L. Clemens, which I found very interesting in my research. So that was his pen name, was Mark Twain. So Samuel L. Clemens was born in Missouri, Florida on November 30th, 1835. His father, John Clemens, actually passed away at an early age. And at the age of 12, Mark Twain had to end his education, and he actually went out and found a job as a printer for a newspaper. And when he did this, they actually didn't pay him in money, but they paid him in a little bit of food rations. So I found that pretty interesting that they decided, that he wasn't paid in money, but rather he was paid in food rations. At the age of 4, Sam Clemens moved to Hannibal, which was a small town beside the Mississippi River. And actually this town inspired a lot of his stories, like Tom Sawyer, or The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. St. Petersburg was that town, the imaginary town in both those stories, and that is identical to the town of Hannibal. Sam actually became a steamboat pilot that they carried passengers up and down the river, and his career as a steamboat pilot ended short when he joined the Confederate Army for the South, obviously, in the Civil War. And he only served there for about 2 weeks, and then he decided he didn't know what to do for his future, and he decided to move out west, out in California. While he was in California, he was known as the best storyteller in the West. So it was actually a magazine that published his first short story that was called Jim Smiley and His Jumping Frog. Soon after, he actually traveled the seas, and he decided to work on stories while he was traveling overseas, and decided to soon after they published the book The Innocents Abroad, and it became a bestseller after it was published. In 1970, he married his only wife, named Olivia Langdon. Soon after he married her, he published the book, one of his, probably the most famous books in American history, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and then the sequel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Samuel L. Clemens died on April 21st, 1910 in Redding, Connecticut. And again, he is known as the most famous American author of all time. The book that I'm going to read to you is probably the most famous of his books, which is the sequel to Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And after I read this section, it does have provocative words in which, instead of saying the word, I will say the N word. And then I'll also talk more about that. That's another fun fact that is about Mark Twain, we're dealing with current events. So here we go. Why, my boy, you are all out of breath. Did you come for your interest? No, sir, I says. Is there some for me? Oh, yes. A half-yearly is in last night. Over $150. Quite a fortune for you. You had better let me invest it along with your $6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it. No, sir, I says. I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all. Nor the $6,000s neither. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the $6,000 and all. He looked surprised. You couldn't seem to make it out. He says, well, why, what can you mean, my boy? I says, don't you ask me no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you? He says, well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter? Please take it, says I. And don't ask me for nothing, then. I won't have to tell you no lies. He studied a while, and then he says, oh, I think I see. You want to sell all your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea. Then he wrote something on a paper and read it over and says, there you see, it says for your consideration. That means I have bought it off of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you. Now, how about you sign it? So I signed it, and I left. Miss Watson's N-word, Jim, had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used the magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night, and I told him Pap was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was what he was going to do and what he was going to say. So, one thing about this book that I find extremely interesting is the language that Mark Twain used to write back in the 1800s. And one thing that's interesting about it is, he says, and instead of calm, they actually had C-A''M, so it's kind of like calm, and instead of C-A-L-M. But when it comes to Miss Watson's N-word, obviously that is a word that is very provocative for nowadays. But back in Mark Twain days, it was actually just a word to use to describe black men. And there was actually a school in Alabama that chose not to read the Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, in their school because of that word that is used throughout the book. And with that, I think you're really depriving the students of learning about a great American author such as Mark Twain, just based on solely a word that was used back in the older days. Oh, so for a student activity, one thing I would love to do for my students is actually have them act out some of the scenes in Huckleberry Finn and be creative with it as possible. So, dress up in costumes, use some of the language that they're using, use some props and things like that. Even change your voice a little bit just to distinguish the characters a little bit. Some of my favorite quotes, Mark Twain had a bunch of really good quotes that I absolutely loved. One of them is, "All you need is ignorance and confidence, then success is sure." And I thought that was pretty cool comment, because ignorance you think is a negative word, and then he follows it up saying you'll be successful if you're ignorant, so to say. Then he says, "When in doubt, tell the truth." And I love that quote. But my favorite quote is, "Always do right. That will gratify some of the people and astonish the rest." And that's so true, because there's a lot of people that don't expect people to do the right thing. So you'll really surprise them if you do. And then you'll really make the other people feel really good. And some of the fun facts that I found about Mark Twain was, as a baby, he was born prematurely. I think it was a few months. And he was actually not expected to live. While he was in California, he actually literally struck gold. So, obviously it was the California gold rush, and he actually did find some gold. He served in the militia for the Confederate Army, which I already talked about. He was a very bad businessman, so he lost track of a lot of his money that he made off of his books. And then Huckleberry Finn was based on a true story, or actually a real person, not a true story. But I thought all those were pretty neat. So again, I think Mark Twain is one of the most important American authors kids will learn about throughout their education, if not the most important author kids will learn about. So I really find it disheartening that that school in Alabama decided not to read the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, just because of that one negative word is used now in our time. However, Mark Twain did not intend for that to be its purpose. So again, hopefully that's not the trend going forward with other schools, especially schools around here, because I look forward to teaching Mark Twain to my future students, because he is such a great American man. So that is all for my presentation. Thank you for watching, and have a happy Thanksgiving, Miss Mary.